Imagine walking down a quiet street in a city called Philadelphia. Freezing cold air, and that strange kind of silence that makes you feel like something is wrong before you even see it. It was the morning of February 25th, 1957. In a nearly abandoned area known as Fox Chase, a man was searching through the brush near the side of the road. Some reports said he was looking for animal traps. Others claimed he was simply passing through. But one thing is certain. His life was never the same after that day. Because suddenly, he noticed a small cardboard box lying in the grass. At first, he thought it was just trash, something somebody dumped and forgot about. But there was something strange about it. The box looked carefully placed, almost deliberate, like someone wanted the very first passerby to notice it. So he stepped closer. And that's when one of the most horrifying and mysterious cases in American history began. Inside the box was the body of a little boy, no older than 4 or 5 years old, completely naked. His body was covered in bruises and injuries. His hair had been cut strangely short, and his face carried a kind of exhaustion no child that age should ever know. Listen, let me tell you something. Some cases are terrifying because of how the victim was killed. But this case was different. What made it horrifying was the silence, the emptiness, the feeling that this child lived and died without anyone ever truly knowing him. And the strangest part? For years, nobody even knew who he was. Before we go any further, if you enjoy real mystery stories that make you question everything, make sure to subscribe and leave a like. Because the story you're about to hear tonight isn't just a crime case. It's a mystery that survived for more than half a century. Police arrived at the scene quickly, and the child's body was taken to the morgue. But from the very beginning, investigators knew this case was different. The boy had no identification, no clothes, no toys, nothing that could reveal who he was. Even fingerprints weren't much help because back then, police databases were nowhere near as advanced as they are today. But the thing that confused investigators the most was the condition of the body. The child was strangely clean. His nails had been trimmed. His hair looked freshly cut. It was almost as if someone had cared for him shortly before he died. And yet, there were clear signs of abuse all over his body, like someone had been taking care of him while hurting him at the same time. And when I started digging deeper into this case, I found something that genuinely stopped me for a second. The box the child was found in wasn't random. It was a bassinet box sold by a well-known local store. Police tried tracing the purchase, and imagine the amount of work that took in the 1950s. Investigators went from store to store, questioning people, manually checking receipts, all just to figure out where that box came from. But nothing, not a single solid lead. Soon after, police began publishing the boy's photo in newspapers, on posters, in train stations, and eventually on television. They believed someone would recognize him immediately. Because how could a little child disappear without anybody asking questions, right? But days passed, then weeks, then months, and nobody came forward. Just imagine that feeling for a second. A murdered child, his face seen across the entire country, and not one single person saying, "I know him." That's not normal. Not even close. The media eventually gave him a name, the boy in the box, and the name spread everywhere. Because people weren't just horrified by the murder, they were terrified by the idea behind it. How could a child exist completely outside the world's attention? How did nobody search for him? How did nobody notice he was gone? And the deeper I looked into the case, the stranger it became. Police did things that were incredibly unusual for that era. They created death masks of the child's face. They took footprints. They released every tiny detail they could find. They even reviewed thousands of missing children reports across multiple states. Still, nothing. No name, no family, no clear story. Just an unknown child. And silence. Some investigators believe the boy may have come from an extremely poor family, or from a household that wanted to hide his existence entirely. Others suspected he may have been adopted and abused. But there was never enough evidence to prove anything, and eventually the theories exploded. Everyone had an explanation. Every journalist had a version of the story, but most of it was speculation. And you know what happens when a case stays unsolved for too long? People begin creating their own answers. One of the most famous theories appeared years later and from a woman known only as M. She claimed she had grown up with an abusive mother and that her mother had illegally bought a young boy. According to her story, the child suffered constant abuse until one violent night ended with his death inside the house. She claimed her mother disposed of the body the same way the boy was eventually found. And for a while, police actually took her story seriously, especially because some of the details she mentioned were disturbingly accurate. For example, she said the child that had vomited baked beans shortly before his death. Strangely enough, investigators had indeed found traces of a similar meal in the boy's stomach during the autopsy. She also claimed his hair had been cut after death, something doctors had already noticed. But even with all of that, investigators could never fully confirm her story. There simply wasn't enough physical evidence, and the entire thing remained just another theory. Let me tell you something. This is the exact part that made the case truly terrifying to me. Because every time you get close to the truth, you hit another locked door. Every clue leads only to shadows. Every theory sounds believable until it suddenly falls apart. And as the years passed, the case became a genuine obsession across America. Detectives retired, new investigators took over. But the file never closed. Think about that. Entire decades passed, and people were still trying to learn the name of one little boy. Through the 1960s, then the 70s, then the 80s, the case kept resurfacing. A newspaper would publish a new article. A witness would claim they saw something. Someone would insist they knew who the child was. And every single time, it led nowhere. But maybe the saddest part of the entire story was the boy's grave itself. Because for years, the headstone carried only a simple sentence: America's unknown child. Even in death, his real name was missing. And the first time I read those words, I realized this case wasn't only about finding a killer. It was about a child who somehow disappeared from the world completely. Picture this for a second. Midnight, an old investigation room, stacks of yellowed files, faded photographs, an aging detective staring at the face of this child after decades of searching. Just imagine that scene. Some cases die with time, but this one refused to. And as technology improved, hope slowly returned. In the 1990s and later in the early 2000s, police began using more advanced DNA testing techniques. Eventually, investigators managed to recover usable DNA from the child's remains. But even then, the databases weren't strong enough. It was like having the final piece of a puzzle without knowing where the rest of the puzzle even was. And somehow, the case remained so famous that entire generations grew up hearing about the boy in the box. Documentaries, articles, television specials, all asking the same haunting question: who was this child? And in the middle of all that attention, there was one painful truth nobody could escape. The boy still hadn't received full justice, because learning his name didn't explain what truly happened to him. And that's when I started feeling like this mystery was much deeper than it seemed. Because investigators weren't just searching for a killer anymore. They were searching for an entire lost life. What did he enjoy? Did he laugh a lot? Did he have a favorite toy? Was he afraid of the dark? You know what's truly terrifying? There's a chance nobody will ever know the answers to those questions. And if you've made it this far, leave a like on the video, because the next part of this story is the one that completely changed the case after more than 60 years of mystery. In 2022, something happened that almost nobody expected. After decades of failure, police finally announced they had identified the child. Imagine that moment, a case more than 60 years old, and suddenly, the unknown boy had a real name again. His name was Joseph Augustus Zarelli. And when I started reading about how investigators identified him, I discovered it took years of work using genetic genealogy, the same technique used to solve several other cold cases. Investigators analyzed the DNA, then compared it to distant relatives, one family tree after another, until they finally reached a name. But listen, even though the world finally learned who the child was, the case itself was never truly solved, because the exact circumstances of his death and who was truly responsible remain unanswered questions to this day. Even police admitted the investigation is still considered open. Just think about that feeling. After more than half a century, a piece of the story is still missing. And honestly, that's what makes this case terrifying even now, not just because a child was murdered, but because the world needed more than 60 years just to learn his name.